All right. So I'm here with Becky Davis, one of the artists at our current exhibition at the Stamp Gallery, Visualizing Narratives Shaping Resistance. Her installation in our show is called In the Shadow of Dixie, A Charge to Keep I Have. Hi, Becky.
Hi, Lisa. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing well, thanks. Thank you for having me.
Of course. So let's begin with getting some background. Can you give some information on where you're from and how you became interested in pursuing art?
Yes. So, originally I'm from Georgia. I'm a military brat, so I lived all across the state. Um, in 2012, I moved with my family to Rhode Island, but my family is still in Georgia, so I visit often. Um, I've always been interested in art. I guess I decided to pursue art when I went to college. I originally wanted to be a teacher, um, or an art teacher, and so I went to school for that and just fell in love with the creative process and decided to put my focus there.
Awesome. I actually thought about being an art teacher too. um, so can you speak a bit to your art making process? Do you begin with a concept or do you begin with a specific medium and building the concept from it?
Well, I always begin with a concept, and then I try to match the medium. I find the best way to communicate that idea. Um, so I consider my practice interdisciplinary. I will either use the medium that I think is more appropriate, and if I don't know how to use it, I will learn. I will learn how.
That's awesome. I like that.
Thank you.
I actually might skip to this question then, since we're talking about medium. Or can you speak to the importance of medium in your installation? The viewer is inundated with images and information. Why is this important for your work?
Yes. So there's a couple of reasons. First, I was trying to, for this particular installation of the project, and it's sort of a much larger project, and there have been several sort of iterations of how I've installed it. This one specifically is more focused on the aesthetics of protest, and the idea of using information or gleaning truth from information that's available. And in my practice, at least, so for this specific project, I think it's important. My overall goal is to give my viewer the information necessary for them to make their own decisions about the Confederate monuments.
Right, yeah.
And I figure the best way to do that is just to give them evidence, just to collect objective evidence as I see it, but also present my personal experience. And I do those simultaneously because I believe that extremely difficult to give absolutely objective evidence. I think, however we decide to remember history or experience life, it's always filtered through our own experience. And I think that sometimes we have to step out of our own experience in order to and think about how something might affect other people.
Right.
And that should be a part of our decision-making process too, not only our personal experience or history.
I definitely agree with that and get that. I guess growing up for me, like when I was like it wasn't until I was older when I started thinking about other people's experiences and like understanding it that I was like, maybe these monuments are not the best to have around.
Right. Like, I can totally see how, from one point of view, these structures signify a history. And before starting this project, I was really unsure about how I felt about them. I thought that it was possible for them to be recontextualized in their current spaces. But as I learned more about the objects themselves, how they came to be in existence, and I saw like just patterns in the timelines of clan activity surges and just sort of intimidation through political laws like Jim Crow laws, and the times that these monuments were going up and the places that they were going up in, I decided very quickly, once I had that information, it became clear that these are not objects that simply show history the way it was. They're kind of symbols of a mythologized history.
Definitely, yeah.
Mythological history, yeah.
Yeah.
And they were used as tools to intimidate populations. And I think once that becomes clear, for me at least, it really made my mind up as to, to how it made me realize that they're inappropriate for public spaces.
Yeah, thank you so much for like speaking to that. Like I think more people need to hear that for sure, like how the statues came about and why they were put up in the first place. Yeah. Rather than using a more traditional art historical media, you chose a documentarian approach.
Yes.
In what way do you see this as important to the installation, its overall message, and connecting to the viewer?
In two ways, I believe. One, I was incredibly inspired by Adrian Piper's show I saw over the summer at MoMA, and how the show had an incredible amount of text in it. I mean, so much handwritten text that it was literally impossible to like ingest it all in one viewing. But it was so deeply personal, and there was so much there to sort of hold on to, and you feel that you not only you connect on a really deep level with the artist, but you see the world through, like, quite literally through the artist's eyes, and that inspired me a lot. Also, in speaking to the overall message of the work, I feel that, like I said before, it's really important for me to present a lot of this research as research, so that it creates a story of a journey, like my journey, not only sitting on these monuments and writing postcards, but also like the journey of learning about the history that went behind it, not just my experience, but the actual history, and showing it through a documentary approach, or a documentarian approach. I thought spoke to this sort of fragmented reality, how we accept a lot of things. We accept history as a simple narrative, one that is on a timeline almost, but we very rarely think about the fact that the written history is written from a specific point of view. It's impossible to record all of history, because everyone's experience of it is so different.
Yeah.
So I feel like I'm speaking to those two things with this approach in my work.
Yeah, there is, I guess, one document that we hung up. It's 8 pages of just like text, and I like how it's all right there. speaking to history. I find it really like beautiful the way it's set up.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
The letter I found, are you speaking about the A Letter to Southern White Women by Anne Braden?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So I was researching just articles before going to Georgia to engage in these performances. I did a lot of research about each place. Before August, I knew of all these monuments because every city that's featured, I lived in at some point, and I knew about the monuments just from my personal experience living in those cities.
Mm-hmm.
But I wanted to know more, especially living outside of the state as I do now. I visit often, but I still feel kind of like a dual relationship with these places. One of both a resident, but also an outsider. And so I wanted to know about just what's going on, the conversations in the towns about the monuments. So I read a lot of newspaper articles about the conversation in each city concerning their monument, and just monuments in general, Confederate monuments in general across the South. And that letter came up in a group of, it was referenced in one of the articles I read. And as I read the letter, it seemed to just everything I was learning about the monuments and how they were established by these women's groups, and then, how the women were almost used in a way by these very powerful men that they were in relationship with to intimidate groups of people. And I realized it was very tied up in these very traditional gender roles.
Yeah.
And that I didn't expect at all.
Yeah.
And that letter specifically, really encapsulated the ideas that I was thinking about surrounding the monuments. And also the idea of using language as resistance, language as protest, which is a really core, a foundational structure of the project in its entirety.
Definitely. Since it's a letter, it's like somebody's actual voice.
Right.
That I think that speaks perfectly to history. So, what was your process in creating the video installation, and how long did it take you to finish it?
Oh, the video is still a work in progress.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So it's been. I started the project in June. So I did the preparations for the performances, and all of the performances were done over, or interventions rather, were done over a 2-week period in Georgia. Then once I came back, I started editing the footage. And like I said, for each sort of iteration of this installation, I work with a slightly different take. So the one that's at the University of Maryland in the Stamp Gallery right now focuses more on the aesthetics of protest. And I wanted that video to be more encapsulated. I wanted it to be possible in the space that it's viewed in, for someone to be able to see the entire loop if they had extra time between classes or during a lunch break. So I try to keep it concise, and I edit it to show each city in less than 4 minutes.
Okay.
But in some, another iteration of the installation was called The Way to a Southern White Man's Heart. And that was centered around the sculpture, a sculptural element. It was a sideboard, like an antique sideboard.
Okay.
And not only did it have many of the same images and in the video, but the video was cut slightly different. And rather than the banners with text, the narrative of how the monuments came to be were embroidered in another series of performances into handmade table linens. And those were displayed inside of the sideboard. So in that installation, I feel like it was focused more on the idea of entertaining in your house, in which case most of these monuments were funded by women's groups throwing dinner parties to raise money. So it references that, but it also references the intimacy of inherited racism.
That's really interesting. Is there anywhere people could watch that other installation, the other video?
Well, I don't have the other video posted. I just have the only way to see the entire video is in the space that they're in, but I do have clips from several sections. And let's see, I don't believe I have the installation images posted yet on my website or blog, but I can easily get those up within the next week.
Okay, yeah, I would be really interested in seeing that. I think that it's interesting the way that you change the documentary, like for different viewers, and I would be really interested in that narrative.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I was also wondering, when you're creating the video, do you get like specific reactions from passersby on the street? Like, do people ask you directly about the project or seem curious about it as well?
Very rarely.
Okay.
In some places, the structure was protected or kind of off, like sort of off to the side, and there wasn't a lot of foot traffic. Let's say in like Kennesaw or Stone Mountain.
Yeah, Stone Mountain.
But in some places, like Athens, Georgia, in particular, and Augusta, where they're right in the heart of downtown, very populated places. It was interesting in Athens. People seemed to go out of their way to ignore the fact that I was sitting on the monument, but there were two people that did come up to me and talk to me over the course of the day. And the same in Augusta. I had one person that spent quite a bit of time with me and sat on the monument with me for a while. And then I spoke to a few other people over the course of the day.
I was curious because I've spent a lot of time in Georgia as well. I have family there. And I imagine like the type of people that might see you. And I hope that the people that were interested were genuinely interested in what you had to say.
I hope so too. I mean, I had great, I feel like I had great conversations with the people that did interact with me. I gained a lot from it, particularly in one case in Athens, where I met a man. I could tell that he had been sort of watching me. He would pass by over the course of several hours, and then he came up to talk to me after a while, and he asked me if I was crazy. I tried to assure him that I was not, and I explained the project to him, and he said, "Oh, well, there's something I want you to know. I don't think that you're crazy at all. You seem like you know what you're doing, and that you want to educate people, and I feel that I support you. And when people look at me, they look at me and think that I don't know anything. They think that because I don't have anything, that I don't know anything. But it's not necessarily true." And that was something that sort of stayed with me, because I realized that in many of these places, it's two things. So in many of these places, I believe poverty is still a huge issue, and one that has its roots, I believe, in attitudes about just I'll say prevailing attitudes about who deserves what.
Yeah.
And attitudes dealing with how that a person can make certain assumptions about other people based on what they look like. And so I know that that's not a lot of progress has been made, but I know that in some of these places, there's still a lot of work to be done.
That's definitely true. And thank you so much for what you do. It's
thank you so much for your interest in the work and your questioning. I mean, yeah, this has been, so far, this conversation has been, very valuable to me, thinking through these ideas and hearing how you relate to the work is very enlightening, so thank you.
Yeah, of course. Of course, thank you. I really do find all of this interesting. I really wanted to interview you just because of my relationship with Georgia. But yeah.
Where does your family live?
They're very close to Augusta, actually. They're in Canton, Georgia.
In where? I'm sorry?
Canton, Georgia? Or
Canton. Oh,
yeah.
Yeah. So, my parents live very near Canton. I included the Canton Monument because it's the seat of the county, but they live in Cherokee County, very close, maybe 5 minutes away.
Yeah, I do. I know that area very well. I don't know, what is the monument that's in Canton?
So, the monument that was in Canton, it's a dual monument. It's an arch, and it sits right in front of the courthouse in the center of a playground, and they have summer concerts there. There's, in some of the images from Canton, you can see a stage that they build over the summer to do concerts. And it's a dual monument. On one side, it honors the Confederate soldiers, and then our veterans, and then on the other side, it honors World War I veterans. But it was, despite the fact that it's a dual monument, it was paid for by the United Daughters of the Confederacy, and it went up in the mid-20s, so right during the time when Klan activity was at its peak in that area.
Okay. I definitely, next time I'm there, I'm going to take a look at it.
Oh, yes.
Sorry, we sort of got a little bit off topic, but I'm glad that we have this in common.
Yes, absolutely.
In the video, you are writing letters to political figures in Georgia. Can you speak to this while you're writing to them? And did you research the individuals and then shape your narratives to them specifically?
Yes, and that's a great question. So, originally, the idea for the project was that I would write to these politicians with a very simple ask. I would ask them to make a public statement whether they are for or against the monuments remaining in public spaces. I thought that was a simple enough ask to get an answer, but with that answer, since this project was originally supposed to all take place before the midterm elections, that they would be held accountable for their stance. During the midterm elections, no matter what they believe, they would be held accountable for that.
Right.
And with that information, people could decide how to vote. But two things happened. One thing is that I didn't get an answer from I only received one answer, actually, from a politician in Athens.
Okay.
He was the only one to respond.
Really?
Yes. And he said that he agreed, but it's a state law that protects the monuments, which I already knew. But my follow-up question was, well, would you support the changing of that law? And to that, I didn't get an answer. The second thing was that although I had wanted to get all of the initial postcards sent off before the midterm election, I ended up having sort of a family emergency that stopped me from doing so. So the project was on hold for a while, and in the new year, I've had to sort of reassess after the midterm election what it all means, like how to continue. So that brings me to where we are right now, which is that just this week, I believe it was on Tuesday, the Georgia Senate passed a bill that strengthens the laws that were already in existence to protect the monuments. So now not only will it be more difficult or are the penalties more stiff for people who break the law by obscuring, removing, changing the plaques, or adding anything to the areas where the monuments are. But they've made it impossible for local governments to take responsibility for the monuments and to have them removed or placed in to a museum or another space where they can be recontextualized. So the government in Georgia has said that people shouldn't have the ability to make decisions over their own community, which is absolutely ridiculous. So now the way that this is evolving is that I'm starting to send out a new set of postcards to encourage people to join me in asking for the repeal of this bill.
Yeah, that's beautiful. It's so hurtful that the government can do that they can protect these monuments that are so hurtful to so many people. Goodness. So so the new postcards, who are they going to go to specifically?
Yes. Oh, and I'm sorry, I got kind of carried away. So
oh no, you're so fine.
if I researched individuals. Yes, I did. So I made spreadsheets with all of the politicians with any sort of jurisdiction over the space. So the local mayor and the local city or county commission or council, whatever it may be. Also, the state representatives and state senators, as well as the U.S. representatives and senators for that area. And then I sent them also to the president just because. He doesn't have jurisdiction over the space, but he has political power. He's free to wield that power in any way he sees fit.
Okay.
So I appealed to all of them. And yes, I did research them individually over the course of the project. Sometimes if I found out something about them that I could use in the language of the postcard to make it individualized to that person, I would use that. Like, for example, there was a city council person from Athens who was a landscape architect. And many of the quotes that I found or that I used on the front of the postcards were gleaned from J.B. Jackson, a book by J.B. Jackson, who is like the grandfather of American landscape architecture. So I, spoke specifically, I mentioned that in her postcard. But yes, so now I'm going back and remaking spreadsheets to include people who were in the mailing before the new year. And if there were new people who, won in the midterm elections, they've been added to the new spreadsheet as well. So I'm sending them to the new postcards to the old people, everyone that I contacted last year, plus any new politicians.
And when would this bill go through? Do you know?
So I don't know when the bill will go through. I know that they're in there. I think that today was the last official day of the session, and that any bills that were passed will now go before the new governor.
Okay.
To be signed.
So, okay, I explored your website and noticed many of your projects weave together personal narrative and history. For you, what is the importance in making this connection?
Okay, so I spoke a little bit earlier about how reality is sort of fragmented. One of my favorite artists, one that I find much inspiration in, had a beautiful quote once. It's Arthur Jafa, and he said, "Reality is prismatic." I believe that with all of myself.
Mm-hmm.
Reality is created by, millions of slivers of a story, and it's only together that we get a full sense of truth, because there isn't one single truth. So I believe that it's important to weave in personal narrative with history, because it's everyone's personal narrative, everyone's personal history that creates history, that creates our collective story.
Definitely, every person is important. In our society, in history, we obviously can't understand the full picture if we're just looking at one group of people, one person.
Oh, absolutely, I agree with that.
So, what is the importance of creating art that is so personal and explores the idea of individual memory within a broader historical memory? So I guess you just spoke to that.
I think the best way to garner understanding among disparate groups is through empathy. And how better to, I believe that, like, through empathy and understanding, we're better able to, I feel that through personal stories, that, like, hearing stories creates connection between people. And having that connection allows us to better empathize with narratives that are outside of our own experience.
That's beautifully put. I definitely agree. I personally find it excruciating when people can't empathize with people, with other people, another group of people. It's important to understand a narrative from another person's perspective, and it's just I just don't get it when people can't do that.
Right, absolutely.
So when people look at Confederate statues, they should understand it from another perspective.
Right. I mean, maybe it isn't heritage to everyone. Not everyone has your same heritage. And if sometimes we have to step out of our own experience in order to understand someone else's.
Definitely.
If someone came up to me and said, "You know what? I don't like that shirt that you're wearing. It hurts my eyes," or "I don't like the thing that you're doing. It's causing me pain." I don't want to cause anyone pain. Maybe I don't see the thing that I'm doing. Maybe I don't see what I'm doing is wrong, or what I'm wearing is wrong. But if it's causing someone else pain, knowing that, it's going to encourage me. That's all that I need to.
Yeah.
Maybe I should question why I'm doing this, or why I'm wearing this. You know what I'm saying?
Definitely. Yeah. Knowing that should be enough. That's beautifully put. Thank you so much for saying that. So in many ways, the images although taken in different cities, are installed so they begin to blend together, and it becomes difficult to discern a specific city or location for each individual image. Why do you think this is important?
Oh, okay. So this was a great question. So I was so glad you asked it. Even though these are individual, like, cities, like very specific places that are important to me for a number of different reasons, these monuments sort of speak to an overarching idea, like an attitude that unites them all. And so in that way, even though the place, the location is different, this attitude that allows for these structures that honor such a sordid history, or not even like a sordid history, like a mythology of this history. That's why I want them to sort of blend together, because this is the one thing that unifies all of those places: the shared history
Mm-hmm.
and the shared attitude that it's okay for us to continue to gloss over this history, and not with no thought to honor the people who really suffered. And in some cases, the trauma that continues, the inherited trauma that continues on in these communities because of that history. Like, all 8 of these cities all have either a Confederate monument, a monument like that honors men who actually, like, literally fought, and in some cases gave their lives so that they could own other human beings and exploit other human beings. While at the same time, none of those cities have monuments for the nameless people who were being exploited.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that each of these communities really needs to dig deep and try to answer the question of why. Like, why is it necessary to honor one side of history and completely, and continue to ignore and erase the contributions of the other?
Mm-hmm. Definitely. It's like the overarching concept of the fact that people were exploited. It's not, it doesn't matter what place it happened. It does, but it's the overarching concept that matters the most.
Yeah, so that's really, I was very glad to see that question, because moving forward, I'm sorry, my phone was buzzing.
No, you're fine.
Moving forward, not only do I want In the Shadow of Dixie to question the presence of the Confederate monuments that exist, but I also wanted to inspire people to question why monuments to enslaved populations do not exist in the same spaces.
Yeah, definitely. Now that I think about it more, I only remember seeing one monument of a slave in Georgia, and it's definitely a concept that people need to think about more.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, this project came out of, it was inspired by a previous project that I was working on that was I was writing a documentary about my personal family history and researching my family history. So I found that, a lot of the stories that my great-grandmother would tell me, there was physical evidence to back them up. And that was so, fascinating to me, because, they only existed as stories. So they were important to me because I've always loved stories.
Right.
But, seeing the evidence, seeing the documents, really sort of got me like put me in the mode of thinking critically about how those events shaped my family and shaped me.
Mm-hmm.
And through that process, it was all sort of centered in Harris County, Georgia, which I had never been to before working on this project, but was only 30, 45 minutes away from my hometown. And going there and seeing these records and seeing the names of people who were related to me, like my ancestors who were born enslaved.
Mm-hmm.
And the only places, like during, like pre-Civil War, the only documents that their actual names, their given names appeared in were inventories for, like, probate records. So when the owner didn't write a will, everything that he owned had to be inventoried and sold off, and then his children split the money. And so my fourth great grandmother's name was listed on this inventory, and listed when she was sold. But that's the only place where her name existed on the slave schedules, on the census. Like, they were just a sex and an age.
Mm-hmm.
And seeing those documents, like the actual handwritten documents in this courthouse, and then walking outside of the courthouse and seeing across the street was at the literal, like, heart of the county, at the heart of the government, was a Confederate monument, like sitting in a park right in front of the county courthouse, and realizing that structure sort of symbolizes everything that was wrong with what I was researching.
The way you must have felt in that moment, like my heart is beating thinking about it. I am so sorry. The fact that was the only place her name was listed.
It was unreal, like holding the actual book in my hand and seeing, like, her name listed in this inventory that included things as banal as, like, meat and lumber and sacks of oats. Like, it was, I just can't explain it.
Yeah. Oh, unfortunately, there isn't a very good transition from that.
Just so I understand. I went off in another direction.
No, I'm definitely very glad that you did. Thank you so much for sharing that moment. It just must have been so hard. Well, I'm going to ask, what do you think is ultimately at stake creating works like this one? You've spoken mostly about it throughout the interview, but I guess, is there anything else?
Oh, yeah, I think there's a lot at stake. And it's not just an issue with the Confederacy. I think that as a culture, we have to think about, I think we have to spend more time thinking about how we choose to commemorate things, how we choose to remember history, and to practice kindness, to practice empathy in the way we remember history, in the way we commemorate acts, because we're humans, we're not perfect, and no one that came before us was perfect. So I think that we need to continue to ask questions, to think critically, and to, like, just be kind with one another. And when our neighbor says, "I'm hurting," we take our neighbor's word for it. We don't tell them, "No, you're not hurting, get over it." We do better. I think that's what's at stake. And like I said, it doesn't just have to do with, definitely these Confederate monuments are personal to my heart, but it doesn't just have to do with them. We have to think with the way we commemorate the founding fathers and the landing of the Mayflower, because, our being on this land, means that there was an entire civilization that existed here before us that we rarely acknowledge. And I think that we should be more thoughtful and try to just
take your time.
I think that we should always strive to be better humans.
We don't speak about it nearly enough. We need to think about all the people's lives that we've changed in a horrible way.
Right. And I don't say that to mean that so we can't change the past.
Right, obviously.
But we can change the way we think about the past and idolize the past, and we can change the way we behave in the future.
Definitely.
And so I would say, in a nutshell, that's what I think is at stake. Thinking very carefully about how we honor what we choose to honor, and, just build a better society for ourselves and our posterity.
And speaking about it, especially in ways like your the way you do your art is so important. I'm biased because I'm an art person, but I think that art is such a good way to speak about issues such as this.
Yes, I agree. It is. I feel like with art I totally agree with you, but I feel like you have the ability to gather all of these disparate things, to draw connections in ways that you can't do with other disciplines.
Definitely. Thank you so much for speaking about that and about what's at stake, and it's such an important thing to speak about. And thank you so much for doing that.
No, thank you. I'm sorry I got in my feelings.
No.
But it was nice. It was nice to talk about.
Thank you so much for talking about it. And you're so fine. I definitely understand. I guess to finish off, I know you have current projects. To any listeners, definitely go on Becci Davis's website. But I wanted to ask, do you have any upcoming projects that people might not that you might want to talk about?
Yes. So, like I said before, In the Shadow of Dixie is ongoing. So in addition to starting to send out a new generation of cards, I will also be returning to my hometown, sort of narrowing the focus this year to just Columbus, Georgia, since it's the city that I was born in and raised in. And also the military installation there is named after a Confederate general, like Fort Benning.
Okay.
So focusing on that monument, holding space, and experimenting with different ways to try to neutralize the power of that space through a number of different ways, through projection, through sound, and trying to stay within the law while also subverting it. So that's one thing that I'm doing.
Okay.
Another thing that I'm doing is this June here in Providence, we have a yearly art festival called PVD Fest, and I will have a booth called My Living Monument Maker, and
Okay.
in this booth, I have a couple of aims. So the first is I've been researching women, notable women from Rhode Island's history for the last year.
Mm-hmm.
And so part of this project involves reintroducing these women back into popular local history, so that people know about their contributions to the state and to the country. But also, I want to do the piece that we were just talking about earlier, like thinking differently about the monument as rather than a space, but as a practice, practicing active remembering. Instead of building structures, sharing stories.
Definitely. I love that. And where will that be? In the festival at Providence?
It'll be in downtown Providence in PVD Fest. So I will have, it's just like a citywide festival, and then in one area of town, they'll have concentrated a lot of like artists and performances, and I will have kind of like a booth, a tent set up where I will invite people in, and it'll be like a mini sort of like one part party, one part museum to the 6 women of the My Living Monument Project, and I will also help people who visit my booth to create their own little miniature, like physical monument that they can carry with them to start conversations about a person that they deem important to remember.
I love that. That's awesome. So it's like more hands-on for the viewer as well.
Yes.
That's awesome.
Thank
And
you.
the first thing that you mentioned, is there anywhere that people will be able to view that?
Yes. So the Columbus interventions will be, I will be live tweeting that experience and posting it I'm blogging about it on shadowofdixie.wordpress.com. And the Twitter account is at Shadow of Dixie.
Okay. That is awesome.
I also have a website for My Living Monument, so there'll be more information coming up about that project, but you can read about the previous. I've had 2 events so far in Providence based on that project, and that's mylivingmonument.wordpress.com.
Cool. Wow, you're working on so much. But
I like to stay busy.
I'm sure, yeah. Well, thank you so much for speaking about this. Gosh, what a good conversation.
I know, Lisa, thank you so much. It was a fantastic conversation.